Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this deep dive into one of the most heartbreaking and overlooked tragedies of World War II. A story of luxury turned to horror, of mistaken fury in the fog of war, and of thousands of souls lost just hours before freedom. Today, we're sailing into the dark waters of the Baltic Sea to uncover the sinking of the Cap Arcona, the forgotten Holocaust at sea. This isn't just history. It's a testament to human endurance, error, and the cruel ironies that define the end of the deadliest conflict in human history. Over the next hour and 10 minutes, we'll trace the ship's glamorous beginnings, its descent into Nazi nightmare, the frantic days leading to disaster, the chaos of that fateful afternoon on May 3, 1945, the raw testimonies of those who lived through hell, and the echoes that still whisper from the waves. Buckle up, because this journey will take us from the sun-drenched decks of a floating palace to the icy graves of Lübeck Bay. Let's start at the beginning, with the birth of a legend. It was the Roaring Twenties, a time when Europe was buzzing with post-World War I optimism, jazz filled the air, and ocean liners were the ultimate symbols of glamour and escape. In the shipyards of Hamburg, Germany, the renowned Blohm and Voss company laid the keel for what would become the SS Cap Arcona in 1927. Named after the dramatic chalk cliffs of Cape Arcona on the island of Rügen, this vessel was no ordinary ship. She was a masterpiece of engineering and elegance, designed to conquer the Atlantic like a queen claiming her throne. At 27,561 gross tons, the Cap Arcona stretched 190 meters long, with 4 decks of pure opulence. Picture this: a grand ballroom where passengers waltzed under crystal chandeliers, a heated indoor swimming pool that shimmered like a jewel in the ocean's midst, a tennis court where the elite served volleys against the horizon, and a library stocked with leather-bound tomes for those rare quiet moments at sea. Her dining saloons were feasts for the senses, ornate paneling from rare woods, menus boasting fresh caviar, foie gras, and wines from the finest vineyards. And the staterooms, lavish suites with private baths, silk linens, and portholes framing endless blue. She wasn't just a ship, she was a floating palace, dubbed the Queen of the South Atlantic for her star route between Hamburg and Buenos Aires. Launched with fanfare on October 29, 1927, the Cap Arcona set sail on her maiden voyage in 1928, operated by the Hamburg Südamerikanische Dampfschiff AG line. In an era when crossing the ocean could take weeks of discomfort, she slashed the journey to a luxurious 2-week adventure. Wealthy merchants, Hollywood starlets, European aristocrats, and even tango enthusiasts bound for Argentina filled her decks. One passenger, the Argentine writer Victoria Ocampo, described her as a dream of white sails against the sky. By the 1930s, she had become a cultural icon, featured in postcards and travel posters, her sleek silhouette promising adventure and romance. But beneath the glamour, storm clouds were gathering. The Great Depression clipped her sails, reducing passenger numbers, and then came the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, whose shadow would soon engulf her entirely. As Europe slid toward war in the late 1930s, the Cap Arcona made her last peacetime crossing in 1939. With the outbreak of World War II on September 1, 1939, commercial shipping ground to a halt. The ship was laid up in Hamburg, her engines silenced, her decks echoing with emptiness. But the Nazis had grander, darker plans. In November 1940, the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, requisitioned her, painting her hull a drab gray and stripping away the finery. No longer a vessel for champagne toasts, she became a floating barracks in the port of Gotenhafen, now Gdynia in Poland, housing sailors and officers in the freezing Baltic winters. Her tennis court, converted to a drill ground, her ballroom, a mess hall for weary men dreaming of U-boat victories. But the Cap Arcona's wartime indignities didn't end there. In a bizarre twist of propaganda, in 1942, she was pressed into service as a stand-in for the RMS Titanic in the Nazi regime's twisted cinematic retelling of the 1912 disaster. The film, simply titled Titanic, was directed by Herbert Selpin and later completed by Werner Klingler after Selpin's mysterious death in custody, rumored to be a suicide after criticizing the Nazi war effort. Filmed in the shadowy harbor of Gotenhafen, the Cap Arcona played the doomed liner, her decks crawling with extras in period costumes while pyrotechnics simulated the iceberg collision. The movie, released in 1943, was a propaganda tool, portraying British greed and incompetence as the cause of the sinking, with a heroic German officer saving the day. Little did anyone know then that this Titanic surrogate would soon star in a real-life catastrophe far deadlier than fiction. By early 1945, as the Red Army hammered toward Berlin and the Allies closed in from the west, the Cap Arcona found new purpose in desperation. Operation Hannibal, the chaotic German evacuation of East Prussia, turned her into a reluctant refugee ship. From January to March, she made 3 grueling runs across the storm-lashed Baltic, ferrying 25,795 soldiers, civilians, and wounded from the besieged ports of Pillau and Danzig. Her turbines, already worn from years of neglect, strained against the ice floes and enemy submarines. One voyage saw her dodge Soviet torpedoes, another battled gales that tossed her like a cork. By late March, she was deemed unseaworthy, her engines barely turning, her hull leaking and decommissioned. Returned to her civilian owners in April, she limped back to Hamburg, a ghost of her former self. But the Nazis weren't done with her. As the Third Reich crumbled, Heinrich Himmler and his SS faced a macabre dilemma: what to do with the tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners who could testify to their crimes. In the final weeks, a frenzy of evacuations began, not to safety, but to oblivion. Camps like Neuengamme near Hamburg were emptying. Neuengamme, established in 1938 on the site of a derelict brickworks, had ballooned into a hellish empire of satellite camps, slave labor factories, and gas chambers disguised as showers. By April 1945, it held over 17,000 inmates, Jews from across Europe, political prisoners, Roma, Soviet POWs, and others deemed subhuman by the regime. As British forces approached, SS Commander Martin Weiss ordered death marches. Skeletal figures in striped rags, prodded by dogs and bayonets, trudging toward the Baltic coast. This is where the Cap Arcona enters her darkest chapter. In mid-April, under orders from Gauleiter Karl Kaufmann of Hamburg, the ship was towed to the Bay of Lübeck, about 60 kilometers northeast of the city. There, she joined a grim flotilla, the SS Thielbeck, a rusty cargo steamer, the SS Deutschland, a once-proud liner now stripped bare, and the tiny motor launch Athen. These weren't ships of salvation. They were floating tombs, assembled to hide prisoners from the liberating Allies. The plan, pieced together from post-war testimonies, was sinister. Load the inmates below decks, seal the hatches, and either scuttle the vessels at sea or march the survivors into Norway for execution in remote camps. Himmler's secret orders, relayed through higher SS leader Jörg Graf von Bassewitz-Bayer, were clear: no witnesses left alive. The prisoners arrived in waves, herded like cattle from Neuengamme and other camps like Stutthof and Mittelbau-Dora. By late April, the Cap Arcona alone held over 4,500 souls, men, women, and even a few children, representing at least 30 nationalities. French resistance fighters rubbed shoulders with Polish intellectuals, Dutch Jews with Belgian communists, Danish resistors with Soviet partisans. They were emaciated phantoms, averaging 40 kilograms, their bodies etched with tattoos of camp numbers, their eyes hollow from typhus, starvation, and beatings. No food was provided, water came in rancid buckets. The holds designed for cargo reeked of excrement and despair. Hatches were bolted shut, guards patrolling the decks with machine guns. Outside, the SS flew no Red Cross flags, deliberately to avoid Allied scrutiny. One survivor, Manfred Goldberg, a Jewish teenager from Riga, Latvia, later recounted his ordeal in a 2023 interview with CBS's 60 Minutes. Deported to the Riga ghetto in 1941, Then through 4 camps including Buchenwald, Goldberg was among those force-marched to Lübeck. "We were packed like sardines," he said, his voice trembling decades later. "No air, no light, the stench. It was like death had already come for us." Another, Kazimierz Biel, a 23-year-old Polish inmate from Neuengamme, scribbled in a hidden diary, "They call this evacuation. It's murder by sea." Darius Wyadarek, just 21, whispered prayers in the gloom, unaware his final hours were ticking down. As May dawned, the endgame accelerated. On April 30, Adolf Hitler swallowed cyanide in his Berlin bunker, his suicide a signal for chaos. Karl Dönitz, the new Reich president, issued frantic orders from Flensburg: evacuate SS elites to Norway, away from vengeful allies. Intercepted by British ultra-intelligence, these signals painted a picture of troopships fleeing west. Meanwhile, on May 2, Swedish and Swiss Red Cross delegates, alerted by local sources, wired British headquarters in Lüneburg. 7,000 to 8,000 concentration camp prisoners aboard ships in Lübeck Bay. Urgent. Do not attack. The message reached Major General Philip Roberts, commander of the 11th Armored Division, who relayed it up the chain. But in the fog of war, it vanished into the ether, never reaching the pilots of the RAF's No. 83 Expeditionary Air Group. That same day, British tanks rolled into Lübeck without a shot fired. Civilians emerged, waving white flags, while SS guards melted into the woods. On the Cap Arcona, whispers of liberation spread below decks. "The Tommies are coming," a French prisoner murmured. Hope flickered like a candle in the dark. But high above, in the skies over East Anglia, 16 Hawker Typhoon fighter bombers, sleek, brutal machines from squadrons 184, 193, 263, 197, and 198, took off from their bases at Celle and Hustet. Piloted by young men like Flight Lieutenant Alan Wise, 22, they were tasked with interdiction: strafe and sink any Axis shipping in the Baltic approaches. Their briefings: hit the Nazi escape routes to Norway, no mercy for SS bastards. The Typhoons, powered by 2,000 horsepower Sabre engines, screamed across northern Germany at 400 miles per hour, their wings laden with 20 cannons, 500-pound bombs, and RP-3 rockets. At 14:30 on May 3, they spotted the flotilla in Neustadt Bay, 3 silhouettes against the gray sea, no markings visible from 10,000 feet. To the pilots, they looked like troop transports, large, anchored, ripe for the kill. "Bandits at Angels 2, crackled the radio. Wise, leading a flight of 4, dove first. "Target acquired, firing rockets," he logged later. The first salvo slammed into the Thielbeck, the smallest ship, loaded with 2,800 prisoners. She erupted in flames, her decks buckling. Prisoners below screamed as shrapnel tore through the hull. Then came the Cap Arcona. At 15:00, a second wave struck. Bombs from 197 Squadron cratered her starboard side. Rockets from 193 Squadron riddled her superstructure. Fuel ignited in a roar, turning the once-white liner into an inferno. "She went up like a torch," Wise recalled in a 1970s interview. "Black smoke, orange flames, beautiful in a terrible way." The heat was apocalyptic. Wooden decks curled like paper, paint blistered, lifeboats vaporized. Below, in the locked holds, panic reigned. Prisoners clawed at hatches, trampling the weak. "The air turned to fire," wrote survivor Hans Arnoldson in his 1945 memoir Nat och Dimma. "Skin melted from bones, eyes burst in sockets. We were alive, then we were ash." The assault lasted 15 minutes, waves of typhoons circling like vultures, cannons chattering at anything that moved. Guards in life jackets leaped overboard, swimming for trawlers that plucked 400 SS men and 16 sailors from the waves, ignoring the drowning masses. On the Thielbeck, 50 prisoners somehow broke free, only to be machine-gunned by retreating guards on shore. The Deutschland, luckier, was evacuated to the Athen before capsizing, saving her 2,000 inmates. But the Cap Arcona, she listed hard to port, her 5,000 prisoners trapped in a steel inferno. By 1530, she rolled over, her hull groaning as it capsized into the 7-degree sea waters. Bodies charred, bloated, spilled into the bay like driftwood. In the aftermath, the sea became a charnel house. Survivors, those miraculous few, about 350 from the Cap Arcona, clawed to the surface, lungs burning from oil-slicked waves. Willy Neth, a Dutch Jew who'd endured Auschwitz before Neuengamme, floated on a debris raft, his clothes burned away, skin slewing like wet paper. "I saw friends' faces dissolve in the flames," he told interviewers in 1980. "God turned away that day." Manfred Goldberg, treading water amid corpses, heard the guards' laughter from rescue boats. Let the scum sink. On Neustadt Beach, over 800 prisoners who'd been offloaded earlier lay dead or dying, shot by SS in panic, their bodies raked by machine gun fire as guards fled. British ground forces arrived at dusk, the 5th Reconnaissance Regiment wadding into the surf to pull emaciated figures from the tide. Medics gasped at the sight, ribs like piano keys, limbs like twigs. They were skeletons wearing skin, one sergeant wrote in his diary. Photos taken by a USAAF F-6 Mustang reconnaissance plane at 17:00 captured the horror. Burning hulks, swimmers like ants in the foam, mass graves being dug by forced locals. Bodies washed ashore for weeks, thousands entangled in nets. Pecked by gulls. In Neustadt in Holstein, Scharbeutz and Timmendorfer Strand, civilians under SS orders shoveled mass graves, each mound marked only by a number and a Star of David. Skeletal remains surfaced until 1971, a grim reminder from the deep. The toll, devastating. On the Cap Arcona alone, 4,600 to 5,000 dead, mostly Neuengamme inmates but also from Stutthof, where 1,000 women had been loaded, their screams lost in the blaze. Thielbeck, 2,750 gone, 50 spared. Total, 7,000 to 8,000 souls, making it the deadliest maritime disaster of WWII, worse than the Wilhelm Gustloff's 9,000 earlier that year, but forgotten because these were the wrong victims. Victims hailed from everywhere. 1,200 French, 800 Poles, 600 Soviets, hundreds of Dutch, Belgians, Danes, even a handful of Americans and Britons. Lists from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum name over 1,000 Neuengamme dead alone, their births in Warsaw, Amsterdam, Lyon, lives snuffed out on the cusp of VE Day. Why did this happen? The fog of war, yes, but layers of failure. Ultra intercepts confirmed SS flights to Norway, but the Red Cross warning, buried in bureaucracy. No markings on the ships, SS malice, unseaworthy vessels, neglect. And the pilots, brave men following orders. Alan Wise, haunted to his death in 1995, admitted, "We machine-gunned the water after chaps splashing about. Horrible, but that's war. We were told they were SS." In the 1946 till report, British investigators blamed intelligence gaps, but pilots like Wise felt the weight. "I'd have turned back if I'd known." Survivor stories pierce the heart. Take Eva Herzberg, a Polish Jew who'd lost her family in Treblinka. Locked in the hold, she felt the first rocket. The world exploded. Screams everywhere, mothers clutching bobbies that weren't there anymore. She survived by sheer will, floating on a door, rescued by a British Tommy who wrapped her in his coat. Or Bruno Neth, Willie's brother, burned beyond recognition but whispering to rescuers, "Cap Arcona, don't forget us." His wife Ava, a German naval clerk who'd witnessed the bombing from shore, searched the beach for days, calling his nickname MLE, short for Ich lieb dein rundes Gesicht, I love your round face. She found him, weak and filthy, and their reunion amid the graves became a flicker of light in the abyss. Another voice. Hans Arnoldson, a Swedish diplomat's son caught in the camps, wrote Nat och Dimma in 1945. "The fire licked our feet, we climbed the walls like rats. When she rolled, I was thrown into the sea, tangled in barbed wire from the decks. I swam through the dead, their eyes open, accusing." Arnoldson lived to 98, lecturing until 2010 on the last gasp of the Holocaust. And from the German side, Wilhelm Lange's 1995 summary Cap Arcona, A Tragedy in the Bay of Lübeck details the SS's cold calculus. They planned to blow the hatches at sea, blame the Allies. Investigations followed. The British till report in 1946 whitewashed much, focusing on operational necessity. Nuremberg trials hanged Martin Weiss for Neuengamme crimes, but the sinking, a footnote. East German propaganda twisted it into anti-British tailies, while West Germany buried it in shame. Memorials emerged slowly. Stolperstein brass stumbling stones, in Hamburg sidewalks for victims, a somber plaque on Neustadt beach reading Angst, Panic, Trauer, Fear, Panic, Grief. The 1982 GDR film Der Mann von der Cap Arcona dramatized it, but Hollywood, silent. Why forgotten? Because it indicts everyone, Nazis for the setup, Allies for the strike, the world for looking away. As historian Bill Niven told 60 Minutes in 2024, it's so peaceful here now on this beach, but out there, a graveyard, the weight of it crushes you. Yet echoes persist. In 2024, the Aralson archives uncovered new survivor names, Darius Wyatarek, Kazimierz Biel, adding faces to the numbers. TikTok testimonies from descendants go viral, young voices saying, "This is my grandfather's story, don't let it fade." And in Lübeck Bay, divers still find relics, a boot, a spoon, a tattooed bone fragment, reminders that history isn't buried deep. As we near the end of this voyage, reflect. The Cap Arcona was built for dreams, hijacked for nightmares, sunk by mistakes that echo today, in drone strikes gone wrong, in intel failures from Afghanistan to Ukraine. Those 7,000 lost weren't statistics. They were poets, bakers, resistors, people who in their final moments perhaps glimpsed the sun through portholes of hope. We owe them remembrance, not oblivion. Thank you for joining me on this somber sail. If this story moved you, like, subscribe, share, keep their names alive. In the comments, tell me, what's a forgotten WWII tale you want explored next? Until then, remember the Cap Arcona, a warning from the waves that freedom's dawn can come too late. Fade to black.